But what I would like to talk to you about is diplomacy. Because, many Americans sort of wonder what that is all about. I mean, after all, to be diplomatic, what does that mean in American terms? It means to be excessively polite and usually not telling the truth. So I think it's important that we think of it a little differently. I mean, if you look at Hollywood's depiction of diplomats, they're usually behind an enormous desk. They're in front of some big flag. They're usually saying things like, no, or I can't do that. I'd love to, but I can't. Rarely do you find a diplomat carrying a kazoo in his pocket. That rarely happens. But yet, when you look at these sort of characters, not liked by Hollywood, great suspicions from the American public, I think we need to maybe rethink the concept because we need some diplomats now. Our country has come through 2 very difficult wars. These have probably been the most difficult wars we've ever had in our history. We need to now look for a different way to deal with some of these world problems. Now, to some extent, diplomats have been very much engaged in these wars. I mean, we are alongside the military, we are in Iraq, we are in Afghanistan. Where there's a war, you will find diplomats. But we can't just always be the sort of Sancho Panza to the military Don Quixote. We have to be out ahead of the military. We have to be out trying to solve problems. So one of the things that we have to do is talk to not very nice people. Now, I would prefer as a diplomat when I was in places like Bosnia, when I was in Kosovo, when I was up in Serbia, when I was in North Korea, I would have much preferred dealing with people that I like. I wish that all my interlocutors would play baseball. I wish they would know things like that, but they don't. So often, you don't have the choice between some good guy here and some bad guy there. You often have the choice between some bad guy there and some worse guy over here. So you have to deal with these people. So, first of all, people who say, we shouldn't deal with him, no way, we've got to be very careful about that. Now, to be sure, there are some people we should not be talking to, we should not be reasoning with. There are such people. Osama bin Laden comes to mind. And I, for one, I'm sorry what the psychologists say. I was very pleased to see what happened to Osama bin Laden. So put aside people like that. Put aside some others, such as Adolf Hitler. You have a lot of other people who are not very nice, but that we can do business with. For example, one of the worst people in the Balkans, one of the worst people, frankly, in the latter part of the 20th century was none other than Slobodan Milosevic. So, did we share values with Slobodan Milosevic? Of course not. I mean, I don't know about you, but I was not in favor of ethnic cleansing or a greater Serbia at the expense of all the other countries there. So it's hard to share values with someone. It's even sometimes hard to share a goal with him because he may have wanted to end the Bosnian War, but on his own terms. So you have to find not maybe a goal and not maybe values, but actually some tactics. So you can say to Milosevic, look, wouldn't it be better if we could at least clear some of these roads of police, of people who are going to be shooting at civilians? After all, looks very bad on CNN. And he kind of got that. And so you start doing these deals with them. Not a very pleasant sort of thing to do, and it's the kind of thing that at the end of the day you want to take a shower maybe once or twice, because it's very, very difficult to do. But at the end of the day, literally at the end of the day, if you can come back and say, okay, the people who lived in Glogovac can now return to Glogovac, you've had a pretty good day that day. And so then you go on and you find out other ways that you can work with them, always keeping in mind what your values are and what your goals are. In dealing with the North Koreans, we also had an interlocutor who doesn't share our values, doesn't share our goals, frankly doesn't share much of anything. And yet, we had to figure out how to calm that situation down. We had a situation in 2004, 2005, where half the people in Asia were thinking that the North Korean nuclear crisis was caused by the Americans. So if somehow Americans have made North Koreans into sympathetic characters, we've been doing something wrong. And I think the thing we did wrong was we did not engage vigorously enough in the process of diplomacy. We didn't show our South Korean partners, our Japanese partners, we didn't work with our Chinese partners enough to show that, in fact, we were very much committed to the process of seeing if we could find a solution. To be sure, sometimes you don't get there. And as I said, sometimes you have good days, but you also have very bad days. Sometimes you will go in, you think you have a deal, you will come back the next day and your North Korean interlocutor acts as if he's had a very bad case of amnesia and he barely knows who you are, let alone what he agreed to the previous day. But I think if the United States can stay engaged with this, find partners, find allies, look with those partners, with those allies to find solutions, I think we're going to be okay. When I look at the Middle East today, it is a vast landscape. There are many, many different aspects to that landscape. Many countries that we can work with, countries that are much more difficult to work with. We need to understand what we're dealing with. We need to be out there. We need to be deployed not just when the crisis comes, but we need to have people who understood it even before anyone could have even spelled some of the names of the countries involved. And that's what I think diplomacy can do. We have, in the United States, we have diplomats stationed in about 178 countries. We don't just go where there's a war. We don't just go where there's a crisis. We're often there where nothing much of anything is happening. But when we're there, we know what that country is about. We know what we have to deal with that country. So when things happen, and if you're the Secretary of State or you're the President, you know you have an embassy there, you can turn to that embassy and you say, what in the world just happened in your place in Fiji? And you'll have an embassy that can explain precisely what it is. So I think as a country, we need to understand our national security is not just our military. We have asked much too much of our military in recent years. Everything we've asked, they've done for us. But now we need to look to try to find other approaches that do not just involve sending the military, but approaches that really stress what our country can do in a broader sense, not just dealing with security, but dealing with cultural issues, dealing with commercial and economic issues, opening up relationships with these various countries. And I have no doubt that the United States, having come through these very difficult two wars, that we are prepared to do that in the future. And so for those of you who are here at DU and contemplating what to do next in your career, I would hope that you would think about becoming an American diplomat, getting out there. You know, nobody out there in the world is indifferent to your being an American. When I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I was very, very aware that when I was in Moyuka, no one had ever met an American before in Moyuka, and no one was probably ever going to meet an American after he met me. I was kind of it for representing the United States in a place like Moyuka. And so for those of you contemplating this type of career, I think you will find a lot of rewards, and you will find that people who don't like us can begin to like us when they meet you, and people who do like us will feel a lot better having met you and having worked with our country. Thank you very much.